My name is Cyndy McDonald. I'm a producer, I'm an educator, and an entrepreneur, and I'm also a grandmother of 9 children. So we all wear lots of hats in this world, and I'm very glad and proud to wear each and every one of those, as I know you are. I'm so glad to have you here today for my Friday Forum. We have Carmen Gallegos, who is helping, and she is my right-hand person. And I'm so excited to have our guest, Tracy Badua, with us today. As you're coming in, I want to invite you to put your name and your location so that Tracy can see where you're from and be able to feel a better connection. We also have a question we want you to answer, and the question is in the chat. We want you to think about any white lie that you may have told or anybody else. And this could have been in high school or, at another time in your life. But what's a white lie that you have told to people? I will share my little white lie that I did in college, and it won't be a big surprise because many other people have done exactly what I did. But it's a little it's a little thing that we all share. Today, Tracy is our guest. She is an Filipino-American author from Southern California. Her books, she's written lots of different books for lots of different age groups. She's written the book Freddie versus the Family Curse, and the one for young adults that we're talking about a little bit today is This Is Not a Personal Statement. And this is what it looks like. I read it. It's just delightful. You did a great job with it, Tracy. And by day, she's an attorney who works in national housing policies and programs. And by night, she squeezes in writing, family, and pup time. Bites of her secret candy stash. And sometimes as a young mother, she sometimes gets some sleep. She lives in San Diego, California with her family and photogenic Maltese. And we're going to share her online website and other links too. So welcome, Tracy. We're glad to have you here today.
Thank you so much for having me. And just some context about why the question was about white lies. I'm not trying to gotcha anyone. I know you mentioned I have a legal background, but it's because the book that we're going to talk about today is about a girl that fakes her own college acceptance letter and then shows up on campus. So I'll just kind of to set the stage for why is she asking all these really personal things about me?
That's a very good point. And and as you and I have spoken before today's session, it was pretty amazing to you to have lots of people come to you and share their fraud stories, is what you call them, right?
Yeah. But I'll keep those, vague and confidential. But I guess a little bit more about myself, as was mentioned. By day, I am an attorney. I work in the federal government space. I do housing programs and grants. And once that is over, I try to get in that family time, pick up people from daycare and all sorts of things. And at some point, I try to write. And my kind of fun fact is some of the books that are out today. So, they're right over here. I've got Freddie versus the Family Curse, and This Is Not a Personal Statement. I wrote those, when I before I had kids or when I was pregnant. It just took that long to get published. So that's the tip and trick behind it is get as much done while you can without dependence. and then try to make it work.
And when the kids just show up, then that's where the no sleep comes in, right?
I earlier this week, I'm trying to get something. I'm co-writing a book with another writer friend of mine, and the way I've been trying to get it done is after the kids are asleep, I will try to at least get 30 or 40 minutes of writing in, or at least reading what we've written. And it's a lot more slow going this time around than when I had these long stretches of quiet, but that's okay.
Yeah, that is true. So I'm going to share my little white lie because I know people will be able to relate to it. I went to college early. So I graduated from high school early and I started college at 17. And this will tell you how long ago it was because I was in Colorado, and at that time you could go drink beer at 3-2. They had 3-2 alcohol beer. So you could go to clubs and stuff and drink that beer. Well, all my friends were going in college, but I couldn't because I was 17. So I did what any other red-blooded American teenager would do, and I borrowed somebody's ID. And so my white lie was like, yeah, I'm here, but this is not my name, nor is this my age. And I remember the guy looked at me and he's like, you don't look that tall. I was like, oh, or maybe he said, you look too tall. I'm one or the other. I was like, oh, I've got these boots on, so that's why I'm taller. And, he totally knew. I'm sure he totally knew I was faking it, but I will never forget that because it was so uncharacteristic for me to do something like that. But I got to go to the club with my friends, and
That's so funny. I think we think we're so clever when we're younger, and we're like, nope, everyone sees right through you. We're just we're trying to be really nice about it.
yes, that's totally true. Totally. So tell us a little bit more about your journey to become a professional and a writer, Tracy.
Right. So it's funny. I think I've always wanted to be a writer. I was the kid that would take, paper from our printer, like some hints on my age. It was the kind of paper that you rip the sides off and then you had to separate it on the perforations. I would take paper from our family printer and fold it together and write these books. But my family came from the Philippines. I was, born and raised in the US, but there was the thing where I was like, I want to be a creative. I want to write books. And that kind of turned into oh, you want to be a lawyer because you like writing, you like reading. I was like, I thought I said I wanted to write books. And it just, over the course of, many years, I think there's a pressure to kind of pursue a field that is more secure, and I want to say not lucrative, but there's something that will pay the bills and give you health care. And so not to say I don't love being a lawyer. I totally enjoy my job, in case any of my bosses are watching. But I, went to law school. I, practiced as an attorney. But I started, once I got reading for fun again, after I got done with all the textbooks and everything, once I started reading for fun, I think that really rekindled this idea of, I would love to try my hand at this. So I started taking a couple classes, reading some craft books, and trying to meet other writers and critique each other's work. We were all trying to grow together. And that's what kind of helped me learn how to write a novel, essentially, or a children's book. And from there, it was just trying to get it published, trying to find an agent, trying to find a publisher and everything. And the business side is a little bit easier for me with that kind of the experience as a lawyer of I know how to write cover letters. I know how to do, all of that kind of stuff. So it was a weird confluence of skills, made it work out. But that's kind of the broad journey that brought me from, kid that wrote books to lawyer that writes books.
I love that, being a lawyer that writes books. Then some days you may be a writer that does lawyering, right?
Right.
And it is interesting that, as you go through those growing up, and we as college counselors encounter this all the time. Parents will say, well, my child's interested in art or music or something, but that they can't, that's not a real job. We want them to get a real job, and that they can do that on the side, but we want them to get a real job. So what are some other pressures that you experienced or you see youth experiencing in terms of where they should go or what they should do?
Well, just kind of some more on that kind of comment that you just made of there is, I think, especially with my generation, with the folks whose families came to the US and felt this pressure to make our mark as professionals on the society, just to show that we're accepted and we belong here and that kind of thing. Like, I know folks who they wanted to be art majors, but their families wanted them to be doctors, so their majors were like pre-med with a minor in art. So it was like, we're trying our best. But it's interesting because now I see the children of like friends and family, and they're all pursuing like kind of the fun stuff, like the arts and everything, and the more experimental kind of majors, like not just the engineer, lawyer, doctor kind of track. They're trying different things, and I think there's more of an acceptance of that now. But kind of moving on to that next question then about just the pressures I see youth under these days. It's, oh my gosh, I feel like I'm so glad social media really wasn't a thing like as much when I was in college, because what I've been seeing with a lot of the youth I've been speaking to really is just the feeling of kind of constant comparison of them comparing themselves to their peers, and it's everywhere. You leave school and you pick up your phone and so-and-so's gotten their admissions letter, and now they're wearing their college sweater on Instagram, and now they're doing like, reading all the places that they got in on TikTok. Like it's everywhere. And that's really tough when you are already kind of feeling the pressure at home, or, you've in my book, like, Perla is the main character. Perla like internalizes a lot of the pressure to succeed and be a certain way is something that over the years that she's just kind of taken on herself. So I feel like the pressure that we're kind of all familiar with of trying to, be our best and, succeed however that looks, like amplify that, because now like everything is very visible. Your success and your failure is very visible.
And so then that leads to extra pressures in terms of wanting to hide those failures or pretend that they didn't happen, or, those kinds of things. So how do you think this is different or amplified for students of color?
I think even aside from social media, I feel like a lot of, kind of my friends and family we've had that experience where you'll be like, at a family party or somewhere, and they'll be like, well, so-and-so's kid got into Stanford. And then like another auntie will come up and be like, well, my kid got into this with like early decision and now all of this money. And like, there's always that. And I don't even know if it's so much of a students of color thing, but it is like this cultural kind of one-upsmanship of, it's one thing for, I think your family and your parents to want you to succeed and to be, to be able to stand on your 2 feet after you graduate. It's another to like, okay, you have to stand on your own 2 feet on this pedestal that we can show to all of our friends and family, and even to all of our friends and family in another country or back home, where they're going to see that all the sacrifice and everything that we've done, like, it's because we wanted like one person to be successful. So there's a lot of kind of weird levels of pressure I think some students of color have to deal with.
Yeah. And especially as you're describing this too, I've seen this also with a lot of my students who parents did immigrate from another country. They're the first generation American. So that adds a whole nother layer. Not only are you a student of color, but you also are the first one in your family. As you said, people are still in other countries looking to you, and you feel. I had one of my students a few years ago, his family had immigrated from Pakistan. It's like we were on the boat and we did all this. He sacrificed everything so you could come to the US and get a better education. And he had a pre-med major, but it wasn't his passion. He was more suited for doing like political, history, community-based type of things. And we talked about that in high school. And he's like, I can't go that direction because that's not the sacrifice my parents made to bring me here, was to put me in this direction. So it was really hard for him to be able to to navigate that and all.
Yeah.
So how do you see students expressing these pressures or dealing with those in terms of what and either healthy ways or unhealthy ways?
Well, in terms of unhealthy ways in the book, she like I think I mentioned she photoshops a college acceptance letter to her dream college that she didn't get into, and then shows up on campus and starts going to classes and living in dorms that don't belong to her just so she can reapply and get in. So don't do that. My standard disclaimer anytime I talk to folks is please don't do this. This is fiction. Don't do fraud. But I think, that is one unhealthy way to kind of deal with the pressure. But I feel like I see and it's awful. I feel like I see a lot of students who, they're really stressed out for being 16 or 17, where that's I go to my 8-hour day job and I do I get groceries and I make dinner and so forth, but there's a certain point at the night where like I'm kind of done. I can hang out with my family, I can watch TV, and I feel like when a lot of these kids in school, like I remember being in high school and being in a lot of these extra honors or extracurricular classes, and you would be up till maybe about midnight or 1 a.m. doing homework or doing extra things. And the lack of sleep, especially when you're growing and you're still trying to figure everything out, is like that's really tough. And I think in general, just creating this kind of all or nothing mentality where it's like if I'm not everything, I'm nothing. And that's really harmful. When the reality is like no one, you're all, buckle up, like life is full of disappointments, kid. Like I don't know how to tell you that not everything is going to go your way, and resilience and is going to be a skill that you really want to develop. But it's so hard to tell that to a young person that's been working so hard.
It is. And it's hard from a parent or family perspective because a lot of times they've grown up in a protective bubble that that's why schools don't rank students. They sometimes even the grading is set up to encourage students and not have a disappointment, and then when they get their first B, it's like the end of the world. But we as advisors, as college advisors, one of the things we're always trying to do to combat what we were just talking about in terms of the cocktail party conversation and comparing and such is we're always emphasizing the best fit and how to tailor your choices based on what your needs are, not what the sticker label is or the bumper sticker, but that's still not easy to do. And so we as advisors really try to accommodate that. So go ahead, Carmen.
So how do you handle the kids who got C's or D's? I tell them that this is in the past and you can't change it. I also assure them that there are colleges who are more understanding and will overlook some grades if they can make over a 3.0.
So any thoughts on that?
Oh man, it just like brought me back to I remember getting it in the moment. It definitely does feel like kind of the end of the world sometimes of like, I worked really hard or maybe not. There could be a reason that you got the grade that you got, but gosh, I really don't. I remember being crushed and just like having a lot of going to the drive-through and getting the biggest milkshake I could get from McDonald's. I have no helpful tips for coping on that.
Well, and I think that sometimes so much of it is dependent on teachers as well. And a lot of times I love the teachers who say, well, I'm glad you got that grade. Now you can't be perfect all the time. It gives you a goal and something to learn and to strive for. So it's putting that whole grade in a different perspective for them. And And one of the things that we try to tell students is there are over 4,000 colleges in the United States, and majority of them, I don't remember the exact statistics, somebody in our audience probably knows, that majority of them accept 50% or more of their students. So there's always a place. And I always want students to know you don't have to be a perfect 3.0 to get to college. I have 2 students this year who have, one has a barely 2.0 and the other one has like a 2.5. And so, you know, it's not something easy for them to hear or their parents, but there's always a place for them to go. So it can be, but when they're all their friends, that's where their fraud story could come in. Because if all their friends are acing everything and they've got a C or something, then they might not want to share their grades or things like that. The other thing that this points out to me, though, as a counselor, is there might be another reason, and there might be a learning difference that's been undiagnosed or unrecognized, and that can lead to low grades as well. So that's the other thing that I would always explore, because I've seen that happen too. So tell us a little bit more about your book and what kind of response have you received?
Yeah, so I kind of gave you the rundown of what the book is about, and it's interesting because as you were talking, I was like, that was kind of the stage that I set in the book of I had to explain what would drive somebody to these lengths to pretend that she goes to her dream college and actually do all these things and
Leave
all
home,
this fraud.
do all this, you know. And I'll actually share another aspect of this, so we'll come back to this, but yeah, I understand that very well.
So, I mean, it was the having to set the stage early on. And one of the things that in the story was that, you know, Perla had a very set idea of these top colleges. Her family had the set idea of these top colleges that she's going to apply to. I don't need safety schools. I'm perfect. I'm going to get into all these wonderful places. They're all going to love me. I'm going to be like, you know, batting them down.
Yes,
and I think it's that I was thinking about this the other day in that, so I think I mentioned my family did come from the Philippines, and the American college landscape was new to them. You know, they did not know that there were, like the thousands of colleges that are out there with all these like, you know, specific, like fantastic programs. They knew what you see in the movies of like the top 10, the ones that are always in the news. And I think that kind of does a disservice to, these, to kids who, want to explore different paths or, have like no personal desire to enter like a cutthroat academic environment. They want to better themselves. There's I think really exploring those alternatives would really serve a lot of students well. But yeah, in the book, to kind of drive my main character to do these awful things, I had to essentially, go to the extreme and have her really only apply to these, elite schools and not take the advice of, I think I even mentioned her college counselor. I was like, not take the advice of her counselor and apply to a couple more realistic choices, or, programs that were more in line with what she wanted to do. So that's kind of, I don't know, that was setting the stage for the book. And throughout it, I wanted to make an effort to show her kind of coming to terms with the fact that, there are different ideas of success. Like you don't have to go to elite school from that you see in the movies and then graduate at the top and then do this and this and this and this and become a doctor and do all of these. She meets a lot of people in her journey at the school who are, have different priorities and they're going to be just fine. So I think it's kind of having that perspective. When you're younger, it's learning that perspective of because I don't know, like I definitely, bought into the story that there was one kind of set way to do things and one set way to be successful. And it wasn't, I think, until I was a little older that I was kind of unlearning that and being like, oh, you got to major in this, or like you got to use your degree for this. That's so cool. So that's kind of some of the fun stuff that led to, like, to me, crafting the story the way I did.
Mm-hmm. So did you feel like as you were growing up and setting those goals, that you had to have the same goals as all your other peers in school, or did you feel like you had to have higher goals?
Gosh, I mean, I was, so in the book, it's about, Perla goes to a very academically competitive school. Everyone wants to be the top at everything. And that's kind of really similar to the school that I went to. It's very loosely based on that. And everyone we had, there was like a breadth of, I think, professions that folks wanted to get into, but they all wanted to be the best at it. So we had a lot of, I was lucky enough to go to a school with some really good like tech focus. So a lot of people were, really driven to do like engineering and coding and everything and be the best at it. And we had some folks who wanted to go into, like journalism and politics and like go to all the local, like all the competitions and do all of these. So it's just, I mentioned it earlier in that when I kind of wanted to do something with reading and writing analysis, it turned into, oh, you want to be a lawyer. And that's like half joking of like, I like this profession. I'm doing all right at it. But it is, I think a lot of, students, especially from kind of first or second generation families where they, their parents or their families just don't know all of like what's out there, and they're going to stick to what they know and what they think is safe. And, lawyer, doctor, engineer, I feel like is probably something that you hear a lot of, like, this is what I want to do. It's like, but do you really? Do you?
Right. And they don't have a way to explore or understand that. And often they don't know what the paths are to get there. Like I knew I wanted to be a counselor, but I didn't know I couldn't get a counseling credential as a BS. I had no idea. And so it was very disappointing when I looked, like there's nothing here that shows me what I think I want to do. And, I finally figured it out, but it took a long time. And, so having someone to help guide and give you that is really important, whether it's a counselor, a teacher, or, a mentor. And that's one of the things I think that we can do as college advisors or just as parents and community members is to provide that mentorship and that be that sounding board for a lot of people. So I think that can make a big difference. Now, you said that readers have been telling you some of their own stories of fraud. So what are some of the things that you've heard people have done?
Gosh, so I have been, mentally collecting all of these because it is wild to me. This book was fiction. The kind of story behind it is I read an article way back when about some like a person that was caught on the campus of an elite university, and they'd been there for like 8 months or something pretending to be a student. And I remember reading it and being like, oh, I totally get why they did that. And then I had to pause and be like, why was that my first reaction? Why wasn't it like, no, that's wrong. Like don't do that. And it was really exploring the idea of what would drive somebody to pretend to be a student at, this university. What would drive them to lie about all of this? And that's kind of what became This Is Not a Personal Statement. So, knowing that was, the inspiration was a real life thing, I just, highly fictionalized it. But as I started telling people about the book, they'd be like, oh, my roommate pretended to go to college, and her parents would just send her cash to pay her tuition, and she would just use it for rent. And I was like, what? I think there were a couple of other ones that were just like, somebody I know, they knew someone who faked going to law school, which in my head, I was like, why would you even fake a higher degree? Just like fake the college and go. You don't have to keep going. That's more and more lies that you have to tell. And one of the ones that actually did come up that I think was really interesting in terms of it's not so much the lies that were told, but it kind of speaks to the whole like admissions kind of process. I was speaking to somebody who was telling me that this was back in the day where you like mailed your college applications out, and they had given it to somebody, they had given it to a parent, like they prepared all of them and gave it to a parent to post and send out. And the parent thought, my kid is too good for some of these schools, I'm not going to send some of these.
Oh, wow.
And that person did not end up getting into, I feel like if I'm remembering the story right, that they didn't get into anywhere because the schools that the parent had removed from the stack were the realistic ones, the ones that they had the most likely chance, like a most likely shot at, like, but we can't all go to, the top 1 and 2 schools. So sorry, like I just kind of thought of that in terms of, it's not really like, it's kind of the parent told them that they sent everything, but I think that's actually even more damaging, thinking that you didn't get anywhere. Like the story is like that your parent kind of gate kept you on that, but that's kind of an aside.
Oh, yeah. Well, and it does. And this is another battle that we have as college advisors, because sometimes we'll have parents who will take it even a step farther and say, I won't fund it. If you don't get into XYZ type of school, I'm not going to pay for it. And so then that adds a whole nother level of pressure to the student in terms of, I've got to be good enough, or I won't have any opportunity at all. And so we've seen that for sure. And that's why we're always battling and trying to help families understand that, it's not the prestige of the college, it's all these other things, and trying to build that that rapport or understanding, build a framework for it so that they do have that celebration when the student is getting into those different schools. So I know lots of people in our audience have a lot of different methods for handling that. So I'm sure we'd love to hear some of those.
It's interesting, like how you handle the parents is probably something you have to deal with a lot.
Yeah. I mean, I have always worked with students as a family, as a unit. And I know a lot of people, that's a lot more challenging. And so, they try to really focus on the student and then have separate things for the parents too. But, going back to what would motivate a student, in Perla in the book talks about, how she, her parents said she was going to do this, that, and the other, but she also said, I'm going to go to this school. This is my college. I'm going to be there and I'm going to do this. And the thought of going back and telling people, oops, this isn't happening, can be pretty compelling. This is where my story comes in, because I did graduate early, as I mentioned, and my application, I had given it to my counselor at the high school, and they were supposed to turn it in. That's what they did when I went to high school, which was a lot longer ago than when you went to high school. And how I ended up on the college campus, I was at UC Boulder in Colorado. I got a dorm room. I never got an admissions letter. I didn't know you were supposed to get an admissions letter. So I figured if they're giving me a room, I must be in, right? And my parents didn't know I was supposed to get an admissions letter. Nobody at the high school told me anything about what I was supposed to do. And so when I got to college in that January and got registered, spent the whole weekend in my room met my roommate and everything. I don't think this would ever happen nowadays, but this is what happened to me when I went to go register for my classes. That Monday morning, after being there all weekend, they said, like, well, who are you? We don't know who you are. Well, what do you mean you don't know who I am? I've been here all weekend. I've got XYZ. Oh, no, you're not a student. I'm like, well, okay. And I'm thinking, how do I become a student? I must be a student. I'm here. And they said, well, you have to, go, we don't have you. You'll have to wait till next year. Well, there was no way I was going to wait. I told everybody I'm leaving, going to college. And the thought of me going back and telling everybody, oops, I goofed, I don't know what I would have done. It was so devastating. And so my next question, well, I can't wait till next fall. So now what do I do? And they said, well, you have to go petition. And I'm sure they told me this as a way to dissuade me and just say, go away, little girl. But they said, well, you have to petition the president of the university to let you in. Like, okay. So I walked out, I went to Old Main, and I walked up to the president of the University of Colorado Boulder at 17, asked to go into his office. Fortunately, he was there. And I said, I need to become a student of this college. And he asked me why, and we had a long, a nice long conversation. And at the end, he said, yes, you can be a student. But that is how I got to the University of Colorado Boulder. That's how I went to college. If he had said no, I don't know what I would have done. I mean, like, call my parents, they come pick me up. I'm not really going to college. I mean, can you imagine all the questions that would have generated? I'm just always very eternally grateful that he said yes, because otherwise, I don't know. I don't think I would have stooped to the fraud thing, but I probably would have stayed in my dorm room as long as possible. I mean, I'm sure my parents had to pay for it. And I found out my counselor did not turn in my application. And so I got the dorm, I did the dorms room on myself, but he didn't do his part. And I'm so glad now students do their own, because it's so much, it gives them control over the process.
Yeah.
But
You can click it and say, like, there's a confirmation, like, that you did it.
Yep. But I can understand just that devastating feeling. Like, you're counting, or you've done something, or you've told someone, and to go back and say no, I can understand that.
Like, you told everybody, you had the graduation party, your parents might have printed announcements. Like, that's the trying to capture that feeling in the book I feel like was the easy part, because just like, it's that thought of like, can you imagine having to go to everybody that just said like, oh, we're so proud of you, and doing all this stuff, and be like, actually, oops.
Right. It's So what do you feel, that we as advisors can do to support students of color, with all these different demands and pressures and anxieties that they face?
I mean, I think we already kind of touched on it, of really driving home that there are alternatives, that there are different ways to kind of get to where you want to go, and it doesn't have to route straight through the top 1 or 2 schools. I remember telling my parent, like, I had a friend who had a choice between 2 schools, and one was for grad school, and one was an Ivy League and one was not. And they chose to go to the not Ivy League. And my parents were like, why would they do that? They could have said they had an Ivy League degree. I was like, yeah, but their program in this field is not as good at that as that other one. That other one, like, you say that you went to this school in this in this field, and everyone's like, wow. The other one's just kind of like, you get the name. So it's really, it was that kind of perspective that I think kind of actually changed the way they looked at things, of like, oh, okay, so there's one thing to have the name, there's another thing to have the actual functional skills and, relevant kind of industry expertise. So I think talking through those alternative options is important. And also just kind of, that's tough, because a lot of this cultural stuff really is deep seated. And in the book, I kind of had to go through it of, part of the reason Perla feels so much pressure to succeed and do this is because, her parents, and I think, her grandfather, like, they came to the US to do better, to not so much do better, but to do something. They wanted to do something. They got here and were met with, in some cases, with some obstacles where maybe their degrees weren't accepted the same way that they were in the Philippines, and they had to retake some courses, or maybe they weren't welcomed in certain professional circles. So for her, this pressure to be the one that's accepted, to be the one that is so shining and perfect that doors will fly open for her wherever she goes, and her parents will be so happy. Like I think that's something that's real for a lot of students, where they feel a lot of pressure that they have to be the one to open those doors. But again, like it's a nice goal, but like you also got to kind of think of yourself. So I think really talking through those alternatives and being like, I know you want to go to X, Y, and Z school, but there are also these other real alternatives that will also get you to where you want to go and may serve you even better. And it might be a conversation to start with their parents much earlier on, and maybe even provide examples of folks that from the school or that they know that have done, similar paths and also reach that level of success that their parents are thinking of.
Right. That's very true. Go ahead, Carmen.
In regard to anxiety, do you work hard to make them realize they are not alone in feeling anxious? Does that help?
Does it help knowing they're not the only ones that are going through this? So has that been something that can be like through a student group or something like that? Can that be helpful?
I mean, for kind of speaking for my own experience, just in general, knowing that you're not the only one struggling, I think is really like it's a really kind of not gratifying, but it's this feeling that like, all right, so it's not just me. And one of the things that comes to mind is I am part of a few Filipino American attorney groups, and one of them had like a wellness series, and they had this one webinar about this concept of utang na loob, which is actually mentioned in the book. It's this Filipino concept of like a debt of the soul. It's this idea that you owe your family for your success, that they did everything for you. So like, you got to be good. So I remember going to this, sitting on this webinar, and it was, this is like a very, very general feeling that I had kind of growing up. If my parents ever watch this, this is not about you. You guys were great. But that general feeling of like, I gotta do really well. I owe it to the family, that kind of thing. But it was a Zoom, and watching the chat on the side with people really saying like, oh my gosh, this is totally my family. This is why I became a lawyer. I wanted to be a DJ, like all these different things of people just really reaffirming like, wow, I thought that maybe I was the only one who was feeling this pressure to follow a certain path, and knowing that there are people with near identical feelings, like that was mind blowing for me. It felt so, it's like a sense of relief of like, okay, it's not just hard for me. It's hard for a lot of people. And there's a cultural or systemic reason for it. It's not because like, I'm not good enough or something like that. It was an interesting and eye-opening experience.
Yeah, I can see where that kind, helping having that kind of support and understanding is so valuable. In AVID, I've worked in AVID program, which is a support program in schools for students. It's helps students to prepare and do well in college. And we find that the students, once they leave high school, having those group of peers together in college can make it very helpful for them to transition successfully. So I think finding those groups and helping students to see and understand, and also having parent academies. We've seen that done quite a bit in the schools, and we actually will train parents from those communities. And if you have a Hispanic parent who's coming and talking to the other Hispanic parents, they'll listen. They won't listen to me as much as they would to somebody from their own community. So from your community, whichever community students are from, bringing the parents in, and the parents becoming those advocates can be very beneficial and formative for them.
That's such a savvy point. I feel like having that kind of culturally appropriate method of outreach, and in a lot of cases like linguistically appropriate, making sure that there's access to the resources in kind of a language or like a method that they understand, because like the college process, really, like the application process was, for me it was confusing, and it was hard not being able to like ask my parents things because they'd never gone through like the American college process. Like they went through the one in the Philippines. So any additional info is always useful. And I think, especially on that cultural piece, like when you have other members of the community talking about it, there's a trust there that I think is hard to come into another community and be like, let me tell you how this works. Like it can be so sticky. So like that's really smart to have somebody from their community kind of tell them about programs and everything.
Yeah, and going back, and Carmen, I want to get your comment on this. I want to go back to the extracurricular. Carmen, you made a comment about wishing you had done more fun things in high school. So tell us a little bit about that.
I mean, don't like misinterpret. I did really have a good time in high school, but when I look back, especially now after taking a gap year, being in college, having an internship, working 40 hours a week, I'm like, none of that really mattered. Like none of it really did. Like in the grand picture of things, everything that I did, I definitely think had its bonuses in building like resiliency and a lot of different positive effects in my life now that I think I have like a better work ethic. But I also think I could have just been 15 for the sake of being 15 and not have just I guess like killed myself to try and get into school, because now I'm in school and now it's like, well, you have to get an internship and then you need to like make sure you're doing these things. And it's like what you have when you're in high school is time and the grace that nothing really matters. You don't have like, or most kids don't really have bills to pay. They have like minimal responsibilities. And when I look back on it now, I'm just like, wow, I could have just done maybe some things a little differently. I mean, I don't regret anything that I did, but looking back now, I definitely think at this point in my life, I want to take advantage of all those things because I still don't have kids. I don't have a boyfriend. I don't have a job. So definitely that's something that I've learned. So I really resonate with that.
Well, and that's why we need to hear voices like yours about this, and especially for students of color, because so often, those extra, I was just watching a national show on Disney, and, the parents of this Chinese American students like, no, you can't do any extracurricular. It just has to be school. No, you can't go play more soccer, and just that whole concept of the tiger mom type of thing is focus, and not really understanding the benefits of all these other aspects. And colleges want students just to be kids. They really don't want to see everybody take 6 AP classes and, score 5s on every one of their AP tests. Yeah, maybe that's what you have to do to get into highly elite schools, but at what cost? And that's where the whole anxiety and the mental health and dealing with it once you get to college too. What kind of mental health does that engender once you go to college? And so Carmen, I'm wondering if you've experienced that aspect for you, from being at college as well.
Definitely. So I think that something that also relates to what Tracy was saying earlier about like having expectations for living this grand life, having a lot of success, and like, making it like in college as well and making it professionally. And I feel like college is where that starts. I read, I think it's Gandhi, it might not be, but someone says, you're going to live like this insignificant life. It's not going to be remembered, but live it anyways. And that really resonated with me. And once I figured that out, I was like, I don't have to become the president of the world. Like, I don't have to solve climate change. I can just go to school and I can go walk around the Met Museum, or I can go have lunch with friends, and I can do this. And it doesn't need to be the end all be all of everything that I am, and I can take a test and I can only prepare for what the test is on. And if I do bad, then I just need to figure something else out. I think it's became more about like trial and error with my life and what I wanted to do. But definitely it took a lot of time.
It is. It's hard to get to that stage. So you're female, you're Hispanic, and you're in engineering. So as a student of color, how do you feel that pressure on you being in those categories? And went from California to New York. So
Yeah,
totally changed cultures, changed coast, everything else that went with that. So
definitely.
how have you felt those pressures?
They're very, very specific. Like, I think niche experiences that I've had to deal with, like Stevens, where I go, is 70% male. And on top of that, it's very much like a nerdy bunch. Like, they're very quiet. New Jersey, and as a culture, like the East Coast as a culture, is just not as friendly as Californians are. And so learning kind of how to learning how to like kind of adopt the culture, but then also making friends outside of that are from other places. Like, my roommate is from South Africa. I have a couple friends who are from like different states. So I think just like taking that with me, of I'm not bound by one area or one culture or anything like that, and I can make friends with other people. It really helps. It's like sharing those experiences. And just making sure you don't go crazy. I used to start doing this thing my freshman year, where anytime I would be really upset, I would just write down what I was feeling in a notebook. So you would flip through my chemistry notebook, and you would just see you would just see me balancing equations. And then the next page would be an entire it would be like a diary, but through the chemistry notebook, it would just be an entire page of me explaining, I'm so mad about this and I can't believe this happened, because once I put it on the page, I could like let it go. So that's how I got through the first year.
And can you relate to that, Tracy? What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, it's funny because I did go to, born and raised California, went to college here, went to law school on the East Coast, and it was a culture shift. It was like a culture change, especially because, I would walk into a room and be like, oh, like now it's diverse because I'm here sometimes. And it was such a change. I think not only going to it was a different academic environment, like different kind of racial, cultural, socioeconomic. There were just so many different things that I had to adjust to. But what's funny is like, I think the thing that you said earlier is what I resonated more with, Carmen, about the fact that like, you can just kind of like have some fun. Like, I think about, especially chemistry. I don't remember a thing about high school chemistry, like nothing. I remember not liking it and like not loving my teacher. But I do remember, getting in the car and driving to San Diego with my friends because we wanted a certain kind of burrito. Like, it was, those like little things where you gotta kind of let yourself enjoy stuff, because that's the kind of stuff that you're going to remember, and that's going to kind of like drive you in the future, so that when you look back, you're not just like, man, I really had an awful time in high school. It's like, all right, it was hard, but I got like some good burritos. There'll be that that shining light of good burritos somewhere.
Mhm. Well, and I think as college advisors and just counselors in general, we really do try to push home that message of just enjoy life. Just, you're a teenager once, embrace that and just have fun. I've had to tell, and I know all of us have, students, I look at their schedule. Well, where are you going to have fun? How are you going to have fun, in your senior year? Now, we don't want them to take it overboard and not do anything. We don't want to have senioritis set in, but we don't want them to over schedule. And a lot of times I find students are way more scheduled in high school than they are in college. And they're surprised when I tell them that you're like this sleep, doing all your activities, you're in school 8 to 3 or 5, and then do extracurricular, and then come home and do homework. And then if you're in a religious community, like my students would go to seminary at 6 a.m., 7 a.m. So, there's 6 hours that they're sleeping. And so that can be very challenging. So that can make a big difference. So, well, thank you very much, Tracy. This has just been delightful. I hope everybody goes and looks for the book. We'll put links to it in our show notes, and Pearl is a great character, as other people, other characters are in this book, but it does compel us to think about what would really compel somebody to go to that extreme length to basically fake an admission and not be able to come to terms with what the outcomes are. So, and Carmen, thank you for jumping in. I just kind of pulled you right in there, and I appreciate the fact
No,
that,
of course, totally resonated with that story. So
so next week, my next Friday forum is going to be July 28th. We're going to have a panel of experts on neurodivergent students. And so you'll definitely want to join us. Jake Weld is going to be there, Fern Burke, Carol Frankenberger, and April Miller. And then we're going to talk about, are you really ready for college, and what that looks like for students, and how to determine whether they're ready or not. Also, if you're interested, I do have another 3-hour workshop. We just did one yesterday. It was great. I had a great participation. We did one on name your price, setting your rates. My next one will be July 12th. It's content gold, creating lead magnets and email lists, and the importance in your work and your business. And then in August, I have a bunch of sessions coming up. We didn't really get to talk about the Supreme Court ruling from last week. I wrote that down and we just got involved, but I'm going to bring in some guests and we'll talk about that as well. We're going to talk about AI. We're going to talk about supporting transgender students. We have a mother-son the team that's going to come and talk to us, and we'll also have another panel of colleges talking about demonstrated interest, and I might throw in some things about Supreme Court for them as well. So hope you all have a great rest of your week, and we'll be back with our Friday forum the end of July. So Tracy, thank you again. And how would you like people to reach you if they have questions or interests?
Yeah, so on my website, tracybadua.com, I do have a contact form that you can reach out to me there. I'm like on all the social medias now. I think like all of us are. I'm on Threads. I think that's the new one. But, Twitter, Instagram, I'm also on Facebook. And I think, yeah, thank you, Carmen, for throwing that into the chat. That would be the easiest way to reach me.
Sounds great. All right. Well, thank you, Tracy. Thank you, Carmen. Thank you, everyone. I'll see you again in a few more weeks.
bye.
Thanks for having
Bye-bye.
me.